The conference room fell silent when Ezekiel said it. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some pitying, others uncomfortable. "Mark isn't qualified for this role," he announced, voice calm and final like he was reading a weather report. My face burned. The projector hummed in the background. Someone coughed. I gripped the edge of the table, forcing myself to breathe normally. This wasn't just criticism. This was execution, public, deliberate, calculated. I'd worked here for 3 years, led successful projects, earned client praise. None of that mattered now. Ezekiel had decided my fate in front of everyone. Then the door opened. Veronica from HR stepped in, her expression unreadable. "Ezekiel, Mark, please stay behind. Everyone else, we're done here." The team shuffled out quickly, relieved to escape the tension. I stayed seated, heart pounding. Ezekiel leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He had no idea what was about to unfold. 3 years earlier, I walked into this building full of hope. Fresh resume, ironed shirt, genuine excitement. The lobby gleamed with polished floors and motivational posters about teamwork. During my interview, Ezekiel seemed perfect. Firm handshake, warm smile, talked about mentorship and growth. "We value people here," he said. I believed him completely. My first day, he introduced me to the team, showed me my desk, explained the systems. Everything felt right. For 2 months, I worked hard, stayed late, learned fast. I wanted to prove I belonged here. Then something shifted, subtle at first. Ezekiel stopped responding to my emails as quickly. He'd walk past my desk without acknowledging me. In meetings, he'd ask everyone for input except me. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe he was just busy, but deep down I knew something had changed. I just didn't understand why yet. The first real confirmation came on a Thursday afternoon. I was walking back from the break room when I heard Ezekiel's voice through a half-open door. He was talking to Patricia, another supervisor. "Mark, he's harmless, good worker but not leadership material. Doesn't have that edge, you know." My stomach dropped. I stood frozen in the hallway, coffee cup trembling slightly in my hand. Patricia said something I couldn't hear clearly. Ezekiel laughed. "Trust me, he'll be fine doing what he's doing. Just keep him on routine tasks." I walked back to my desk slowly, processing what I'd heard. I hadn't done anything wrong. My performance reviews were solid. Clients liked working with me. So why was he already limiting my future before I'd even had a chance? That night, I barely slept. The words "not leadership material" echoed in my mind like a curse I couldn't shake. 2 months later, I led my first major client project. The Westfield account had been struggling for months, deadlines missed, communication broken. Ezekiel assigned it to me almost reluctantly, like he expected me to fail. Instead, I rebuilt the timeline, restructured the workflow, and personally called the client to apologize for past issues. It worked. Within 6 weeks, we delivered everything on schedule. The client sent an email praising our team, specifically mentioning my name. Director Anderson called me personally to say congratulations. For one brief moment, I felt validated. Then Ezekiel reassigned the follow-up contract to Tyler, his favorite employee who hadn't touched the original project. "Tyler needs the visibility," Ezekiel explained casually. I stood in his office, confused and angry. "But I built that relationship," I said. He smiled without warmth. "And you did great. Now let someone else grow too." That's when I understood. This wasn't about fairness. It was about control. The rumors started shortly after. Coworkers began asking strange questions. "Hey Mark, did you have to retake your certification exam?" someone asked during lunch. I frowned. "No, why?" They shrugged awkwardly. "Just something I heard." Another time, Patricia pulled me aside, concerned. "HR mentioned some performance issues. Are you okay?" My chest tightened. "What performance issues? I haven't been written up for anything." She looked uncomfortable. "I don't know the details. Just wanted to check on you." I realized then that I wasn't just being ignored anymore. I was being systematically discredited. Lies about me were spreading through the office like poison, and I had no idea how to fight them. Worse, I didn't know who would believe me if I tried to defend myself. Ezekiel had planted seeds of doubt about me long before I even noticed. Now those seeds were growing into something darker. 2 weeks later, HR called me in. My hands were sweating as I walked down the sterile hallway to Veronica's office. She gestured to a chair, her face neutral and professional. "Mark, we've received some anonymous concerns about your work," she began carefully. My stomach twisted. "What concern?" She glanced at her notes. "Missed deadlines, communication issues, professionalism questions." None of it was true. I'd never missed a deadline. My emails were always clear and respectful. "How do you defend yourself against accusations you can't see?" "Who reported this?" I asked. "That's confidential," Veronica said, "but we take all complaints seriously. Consider this a verbal warning, just be mindful moving forward." I left her office feeling sick. This was exactly what Ezekiel wanted. Plant doubt, create a paper trail, make me look problematic, and it was working. I couldn't prove he was behind it, but I knew. The timing was too perfect, the accusations too vague. Too strategic. One Friday evening, I stayed late reviewing quarterly projections Ezekiel had circulated. Something felt off about the numbers. I cross-checked them against raw data from our database, and my suspicion was confirmed. Ezekiel had miscalculated revenue forecasts by nearly 15%. It wasn't a small error. If leadership presented these numbers to investors, we'd look incompetent. The next morning, I knocked on Ezekiel's door. "I found an issue with the projections," I said, handing him a printed comparison. He barely glanced at it. "Those numbers are fine, Mark, don't overthink it." "But if you look here," I said, "they're fine." His tone was sharp, dismissive. I stood there for a moment, then nodded and left. But I didn't delete my work. I printed copies of both versions, the incorrect projections and my corrected ones, and stored them in a folder at home. I didn't know why yet, but instinct told me I'd need proof someday. A week later, Director Anderson called me directly. His voice was calm but curious. "Mark, I'm looking at some updated projections you worked on. These numbers are different from what Ezekiel sent me." My pulse quickened. "Yes, sir. I found some calculation errors in the original version. I wanted to make sure the data was accurate before it went to leadership." There was a pause. "Good catch." This could have been embarrassing. He thanked me and hung up. I sat at my desk, hands trembling slightly. Anderson now knew that Ezekiel had been careless, that I had quietly fixed a major problem. I didn't throw Ezekiel under the bus directly, but the truth was out there now. For the first time in months, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe someone in power was finally paying attention. Maybe competence still mattered. I didn't know yet that Anderson was watching more closely than I realized. The retaliation came swiftly. Ezekiel stripped me of meaningful assignments. Instead of client projects, I was given data entry tasks. Instead of team meetings, I was excluded from planning sessions. He'd walk past my desk without acknowledgement, answer my emails with one-word replies, and publicly dismiss my input during the rare times I was allowed to speak. It felt like suffocation. Every day I came to work feeling smaller, invisible, useless. But something unexpected happened. Patricia, the supervisor I'd overheard Ezekiel talking to months ago, started noticing. She'd stop by my desk occasionally, asking how I was doing. Once she handed me a sticky note with a phone number. "If you ever need to talk to someone in HR confidentially, call this." I looked at her confused. She just nodded and walked away. I wasn't alone anymore. People were watching, quietly, carefully, waiting for the right moment to act. One afternoon, Clarence, a senior analyst who'd been with the company for 12 years, pulled me into an empty conference room. He closed the door and looked at me seriously. "Mark, I need to tell you something. Ezekiel is sabotaging you." I exhaled slowly. "I know. No, I mean deliberately. He's done this before to other people. 3 years ago, a guy named Omar had the same thing happen. Ezekiel saw him as a threat and destroyed his reputation until Omar quit." My hands clenched into fists. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" Clarence sighed. "Because he's good at covering his tracks, but you're smarter than Omar was. You're staying calm, doing good work. That's the right move." He leaned closer. "Document everything, every email, every conversation, every project you complete. Build a file so detailed that nobody can deny the truth." I nodded. From that day forward, I kept records of everything. Every accomplishment, every email Ezekiel ignored, every time I was excluded. Evidence, not emotion. Over the next few months, something strange began happening. Other employees started filing complaints about Ezekiel, quietly at first, then more frequently. Veronica in HR noticed the pattern. Tyler, Ezekiel's favorite, even submitted a report about being overworked and manipulated. Patricia documented incidents of Ezekiel yelling at staff members behind closed doors. The whispers grew louder. People who'd stayed silent for years finally spoke up. Ezekiel must have sensed something shifting because his behavior became more erratic. He snapped at people in meetings, blamed his team for his mistakes, and grew increasingly paranoid. One morning, I overheard him arguing with Clarence in the hallway. "You people don't appreciate what I do for this department," Ezekiel hissed. Clarence just stared at him. "We appreciate honesty, Ezekiel, that's all." The cracks in his armor were showing, and corporate was starting to notice. I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and let the storm build naturally around him. In the middle of this chaos, something unexpected happened. A major issue erupted between our department and the finance team. Data wasn't syncing properly, reports were delayed, and both sides were blaming each other. Ezekiel ignored it, overwhelmed by his own crumbling authority. So I stepped in. I spent 2 days coordinating between both teams, identifying the technical breakdown and implementing a simple fix that resolved the entire problem. Director Anderson heard about it from the finance director. He called me into his office personally. "Mark, this is leadership," he said simply. "You saw a problem, took initiative, and solved it without drama. That's what we need more of." I thanked him quietly, but inside something shifted. Anderson wasn't just noticing my work anymore. He was evaluating me, testing me, preparing me for something bigger. I didn't know what yet, but I could feel the momentum changing, slowly, steadily. Inevitably. A month later, I discovered another serious error in Ezekiel's work. This time, it involved audit compliance numbers that would be reviewed by external regulators. If these numbers went through uncorrected, the company could face penalties. I corrected them immediately and sent a detailed report to Anderson, copying Veronica from HR for documentation. Ezekiel never acknowledged it. He never thanked me, never admitted the mistake. But the evidence was piling up. A clear pattern was forming. Ezekiel was careless, reactive, and increasingly incompetent under pressure. Meanwhile, I was consistent, reliable, and effective. My file of documentation grew thicker. Every corrected error, every solved problem, every time I'd been excluded yet still delivered results. I wasn't fighting Ezekiel with words or drama. I was fighting him with proof. Cold, undeniable, documented proof. And soon, the people who mattered would have to choose between his excuses and my results. That choice was becoming easier every single day. Then corporate announced a reorganization. Departments would merge, roles would shift, and leadership would be reevaluated. Surveys went out to all employees, asking about management effectiveness, team morale, and workplace culture. Ezekiel smiled confidently during the announcement meeting. He probably assumed his team would protect him out of fear or loyalty. But fear doesn't build loyalty. It builds resentment. One by one, employees filled out those surveys honestly. They rated Ezekiel poorly on communication, fairness, and leadership ability. Some wrote detailed comments about feeling undervalued and manipulated. Patricia told me later that the results were worse than HR expected. "His numbers were in the bottom 10% company-wide," she whispered. I didn't celebrate. I just nodded. Corporate politics were shifting, and Ezekiel's foundation was crumbling beneath him. He still didn't see it coming. He was too arrogant, too convinced of his own importance. That blindness would be his downfall, and I would be there to watch it happen. A few weeks later, Veronica called me into her office again. This time the tone was completely different. "Mark, we're conducting leadership evaluations as part of the restructure," she began. "We'd like to assess your potential for a management role." I blinked, caught off guard. "Management?" She smiled slightly. "You've consistently demonstrated problem-solving skills, initiative, and professionalism. Director Anderson specifically recommended you." My heart raced. This wasn't a warning. This was an opportunity. They asked me questions about conflict resolution, team dynamics, and long-term vision. I answered honestly, pulling from real experiences. Fixing projects Ezekiel had ignored, solving problems he'd created, leading when no one else would. When the meeting ended, Veronica shook my hand. "We'll be in touch." I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, Real, tangible hope. I didn't know it yet, but behind closed doors, decisions were already being made. My future was being rewritten while Ezekiel's was being erased. Ezekiel started losing control completely. He snapped at employees over minor mistakes, sent angry emails late at night, and grew visibly paranoid during meetings. One afternoon, he exploded at Tyler in front of the entire team. "You people don't listen. I have to do everything myself because none of you are competent." Tyler's face flushed red, but he stayed silent. The rest of us sat frozen, uncomfortable and shocked. Later that day, someone anonymously sent a recording of that outburst to HR. I don't know who did it, maybe Tyler, maybe Patricia, maybe someone else who'd finally had enough, but the recording was clear, brutal, and undeniable. Ezekiel's voice, full of rage and contempt, permanently captured. Veronica listened to it in her office. Then she forwarded it to Director Anderson. The final nail had been hammered in. Ezekiel's career was over. He just didn't know it yet. And I, somehow, was about to inherit everything he'd tried to destroy. Behind closed doors, decisions were made quickly. Director Anderson met with Veronica and senior leadership. They reviewed everything, the complaints, the recordings, the performance data, the survey results, and they reviewed me. My documentation, my corrected errors, my quiet leadership during chaos. Anderson made the recommendation. Mark should lead the newly merged department. He's earned it. Veronica agreed. He's been professional through everything. No drama, no retaliation, just consistent results. The decision was finalized. Ezekiel would be reassigned to a non-leadership role pending further review. I would be promoted to department head. But they didn't tell us yet. They wanted to handle the transition carefully, strategically. For 2 more weeks, I came to work not knowing my life was about to change. Ezekiel, arrogant as ever, still believed he was untouchable. He had no idea the ground beneath him had already disappeared. And I had no idea I was about to stand exactly where he once stood, but better. Then came the meeting. Ezekiel called the team together for a routine update. I sat in my usual spot, quiet and invisible. That's when he did it. He looked directly at me and said, "Mark isn't qualified for leadership. Let's be honest about that." The room went silent. 20 people stared. Some looked down. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Then the door opened. Veronica from HR stepped inside, her expression unreadable. "Ezekiel, Mark, please stay behind. Everyone else, thank you." The team left quickly, relieved to escape. I stayed seated, hands folded on the table. Ezekiel leaned back, confident. He thought this was his moment of final victory. He had no idea what was about to happen. Veronica closed the door. Director Anderson walked in behind her, and everything Ezekiel believed about his power was about to shatter in the next 5 minutes. Anderson sat down across from us, his expression serious. Veronica placed a folder on the table. "Ezekiel, we've been reviewing your leadership over the past 6 months, Anderson began. "We've received multiple complaints, documented performance issues, and behavioral concerns." Ezekiel's face paled slightly. "What complaints?" Veronica opened the folder. 18 formal reports, recordings of inappropriate conduct, evidence of mismanagement and retaliation. She slid documents across the table. Emails, survey results, my corrected projections. Ezekiel's hands trembled as he flipped through them. This is taken out of context." "No," Anderson said firmly, "this is a pattern." Then he turned to me. "Mark, effective immediately, you're being promoted to department head. Ezekiel, you're being reassigned pending further review." The room spun. I sat frozen, unable to process what I just heard. Ezekiel stared at me, his face a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "No," Anderson said, "this is correction." And just like that, everything changed. The next morning, I walked into Ezekiel's old office, my office now. I opened the blinds, let sunlight pour in, and sat behind the desk. It felt surreal. Over the following weeks, I rebuilt the department. I held one-on-one meetings with every team member, listened to their concerns, and made changes. No more favoritism, no more fear-based management, just respect, transparency, and fairness. Slowly, the culture transformed. People smiled more, Collaboration increased. Morale improved. Months later, I ran into Ezekiel in the parking lot. He looked older, tired. He stopped and stared at me for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for what I did to you." I looked at him, feeling no anger anymore, just pity. "I forgive you," I said, "not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." He nodded and walked away. I stood there under the evening sky, realizing something profound. Revenge wasn't the victory, growth was. And I had finally become the leader I was always meant to be. Maybe you've been Mark. Maybe someone like Ezekiel once looked at you and said you weren't good enough, that you didn't have what it takes, that you should stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible. Maybe they took credit for your work. Maybe they spread lies about you. Maybe they made you doubt yourself so deeply that you wondered if they were right. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. You don't win by shouting louder. You win by working smarter, by documenting every success, by staying calm when they want you to break, by becoming so undeniably good that eventually the right people notice. Mark didn't scream. He didn't quit in anger. He stayed consistent, professional, excellent. And eventually, excellence couldn't be ignored anymore. If this story hit you in the chest, if it felt too real, if it reminded you of your own battles, then do yourself a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now, not because it's routine, but because you deserve stories that remind you that you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you're stronger than the people who tried to break you. Subscribe so you never miss the next story that speaks your truth, the next chapter that reminds you exactly who you are.